In the vast expanse of the galaxy where civilizations rise and fall like cosmic tides, there exists a truth that even the most advanced species refuse to acknowledge. Humans possess an inexplicable gift for finding life where others see only death. When the Great Dragon extinction was declared across 17 star systems, when the Galactic Council erected monuments to honor the last of the ancient Dracmori, when even the most optimistic xenobiologists packed away their research and mourned the loss of the universe's most magnificent creatures, humanity had not yet discovered space travel. But humans have always had a peculiar relationship with the impossible. Sarah Chen would never have imagined that her routine planetary survey mission to the forgotten world of Xerion Prime would uncover the galaxy's greatest secret, challenge the authority of beings who had ruled the stars for millennia, and prove once again that sometimes the most primitive species possesses wisdom that transcends technology. The dragons were not extinct. They were waiting. And they had been waiting for someone exactly like her. Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her gloved hand against the viewing port of the survey vessel Meridian, watching as Xerion Prime grew larger before them. The planet hung in space like a forgotten jewel, its surface marked by deep canyons and towering mountain ranges that cast long shadows across continents of rust-colored stone. According to the Galactic Database, this world had been surveyed 3 times by different species over the past 2 centuries. Each expedition had concluded the same thing: barren, lifeless, economically worthless. Perfect for human colonization surveys, which meant perfect for her current assignment. Atmospheric composition looks breathable with standard filtration gear, announced Lieutenant Torres from the pilot's seat, his fingers dancing across holographic displays. Gravity's about 0.9 Earth standard. Temperature ranges from -40 to +60 Celsius depending on the region. Sarah nodded, making notes on her tablet. As the lead xenobiologist for the Terra Colonial Survey Initiative, she had visited dozens of worlds that other species had dismissed as worthless. Humans had a talent for finding value in places others overlooked. Sometimes it was mineral deposits buried too deep for conventional scanners. Sometimes it was unique atmospheric properties that made terraforming easier. And sometimes, though rarely, it was life itself. "Any signs of previous settlements?" she asked, though she already knew the answer from the reports. Negative on artificial structures. The Zephyrians classified this as Category 7, completely sterile. The Altarian Collective agreed after their survey 20 years later. Most recent survey was the Vorthan Empire, 15 years ago. Same conclusion. Sarah frowned as she studied the planet's surface through the enhanced imaging systems. Something about the landscape bothered her, though she couldn't articulate what. The mountain ranges seemed too organized, too purposeful in their arrangement. There were patterns in the canyon systems that suggested more than simple geological processes. "Take us into a lower orbit," she ordered. "I want to do detailed surface scans before we commit to a landing site." Torres adjusted their trajectory, bringing them closer to the planet's surface. Through the viewport, Sarah could make out individual rock formations, ancient riverbeds, and what appeared to be vast cave systems tunneling through the mountainsides. The caves were particularly intriguing. They seemed to form networks that connected across great distances underground. "Picking up some interesting mineral compositions," reported Ensign Martinez from the sensor station. "High concentrations of rare earth elements, particularly in the mountain regions. Also detecting some kind of crystalline formations deep underground. Very deep. Some of these cave systems go down several kilometers. Geological activity, seismically stable. Whatever carved out these cave networks, it happened a long time ago. Thousands of years at minimum, possibly much longer." Psst. Sarah made more notes, her excitement growing. Deep cave systems meant potential for unique ecosystems, possibly even life forms that had evolved in isolation. If she could find even microbial life, it would justify the survey mission and potentially lead to bigger discoveries. "There," she said suddenly, pointing to a region where several mountain ranges converged around what appeared to be a massive circular depression. "That formation there? It's not natural." Torres enhanced the imaging, zooming in on the area she had indicated. The depression was indeed unusual, perfectly circular, approximately 50 kilometers in diameter, with steep walls that dropped into darkness. Around its perimeter, the mountain ranges formed an almost perfect ring, as if the peaks themselves had been deliberately arranged to create a natural barrier. "Could be an impact crater," Torres suggested, though he sounded uncertain. "No." Sarah shook her head. "The mountain formation predates any impact. Look at the geological layers. This is something else entirely." She pulled up comparative images from the database, searching for similar formations on other worlds. Nothing matched exactly, but she found references to circular depressions on 3 other planets, all in different star systems. Each had been surveyed and dismissed as geologically interesting, but otherwise unremarkable. None of the reports mentioned the surrounding mountain formations, which suggested the other survey teams had missed the connection. "Set course for the depression," she ordered. "We're going to investigate this firsthand." As their ship descended through the atmosphere, Sarah noticed something else unusual. The air currents around the mountain ranges were complex, creating thermal patterns that seemed designed to channel wind in specific directions. It was almost as if the entire region had been engineered to create optimal flying conditions. The thought struck her as absurd, until she remembered where she was. 3 separate advanced civilizations had surveyed this planet and found nothing. But humans had a different perspective, a different way of looking at things. They were often called primitive by the galactic community, barely advanced enough for space travel, lacking the sophisticated sensors and analytical systems of older species. But sometimes that primitive perspective revealed things that advanced technology missed. They landed on a plateau overlooking the circular depression, the ship's engines stirring up clouds of rust-colored dust that took several minutes to settle. Through the viewport, Sarah could see the edge of the depression clearly now, and what she saw made her pulse quicken. The walls of the depression weren't smooth stone, as they had appeared from orbit. They were covered in intricate patterns, geometric designs that repeated at regular intervals, carved deep into the rock face. The patterns were too complex and too regular to be natural formations. Yet they showed signs of extreme age, worn smooth by millennia of wind and weather. "Torres Martinez, suit up," she ordered, already moving toward the equipment lockers. "We're going down there." "Ma'am," Torres hesitated. "Maybe we should do more remote sensing first. Get a complete picture before we commit to surface exploration." Sarah paused in the middle of checking her environmental suit. Torres was right to be cautious. Standard protocol called for extensive remote analysis before any direct surface contact. But something about this place called to her, demanded immediate investigation. It was an unscientific impulse, the kind that had gotten her in trouble with previous survey teams dominated by other species. "We'll stay in constant communication with the ship," she compromised. "First sign of any danger, we return immediately. But I need to see those wall carvings up close." 20 minutes later, the 3 humans stood at the edge of the depression, looking down into its depths. The carved patterns were even more impressive at ground level, intricate spirals and geometric shapes that seemed to tell a story, though Sarah couldn't begin to interpret their meaning. The depression itself was deeper than their senses had indicated, disappearing into shadow that their enhanced lighting couldn't fully penetrate. "Electromagnetic readings are off the charts down there," Martinez reported, studying his handheld scanner. "Something's generating a strong field at the bottom of the depression. Could be natural crystal formations, could be something else." "Artificial?" Sarah asked. "Can't tell from here. The interference is too strong." Sarah activated her suit's recording systems and began a careful descent along what appeared to be an ancient pathway carved into the depression's wall. The path was wide enough for several people to walk abreast, with regular intervals that suggested it had been designed for beings larger than humans, much larger. As they descended, the carved patterns grew more complex and more detailed. Sarah began to notice recurring motifs, winged shapes that appeared throughout the designs, always in positions of prominence. The winged figures were depicted in various poses, soaring through clouded skies, perched on mountain peaks, gathered in what appeared to be ceremonial formations. "These look almost like—" Torres began, then stopped. "Like what?" Sarah prompted. "Like dragons," he admitted reluctantly. "I know how that sounds, but look at the wing structures, the elongated necks, the way they're positioned in the carvings." Sarah looked more carefully at the patterns and realized Torres was right. The winged figures did resemble the dragons of Earth mythology, but also something more. These carvings suggested creatures of immense intelligence and sophistication, not the primitive beasts of human folklore. "The Dracomori," Martinez said suddenly. "These look like the Dracmori." Sarah felt her heart skip. The Dracmori were legendary throughout the galaxy, ancient beings of incredible power and wisdom who had disappeared millennia ago. Most species regarded them as myths, stories told by primitive civilizations to explain natural phenomena they didn't understand. But some of the older races spoke of them as historical fact, creatures who had once ruled vast territories across multiple star systems before vanishing without explanation. "The Dracmori went extinct over 5,000 years ago," Sarah said, though her voice lacked conviction. Every survey team that's ever looked for evidence of them has come up empty. Maybe they weren't looking in the right places, Torres suggested. As they continued deeper into the depression, the electromagnetic interference grew stronger, making their scanners increasingly unreliable. But Sarah's eyes were adjusting to the strange quality of light that seemed to emanate from somewhere far below. The carved walls were giving way to natural stone formations, but these too showed signs of modification, smooth passages that connected to larger chambers, all following organic curves that felt intentional rather than random. At approximately 2 kilometers depth, they reached the source of the electromagnetic field. Before them stretched a vast underground chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness above their heads. The chamber floor was covered in what appeared to be crystalline formations, but as Sarah's enhanced lights played across them, she realized they weren't natural crystals at all. They were eggs. Thousands upon thousands of eggs, each one roughly the size of a human torso, arranged in careful patterns across the chamber floor. The eggs glowed with a soft internal light that pulsed in slow, rhythmic patterns. Some were clearly ancient, their surfaces dulled by millennia of waiting. Others seemed newer, their shells still gleaming with an almost metallic sheen. "My God," Martinez whispered, his voice barely audible over the communication system. "How long have these been here?" Sarah approached the nearest cluster of eggs, her scanner finally able to provide some readings now that they were clear of the electromagnetic interference from above. What she saw made her legs weak with shock. "They're alive," she reported, her voice struggling to remain professional. "All of them. Metabolic activity is extremely slow, but they're definitely alive. And according to these readings, some of them are very close to hatching." She moved between the clusters, taking readings and making observations. The eggs were arranged in distinct groups, each group showing slightly different characteristics. Some were larger than others, some glowed more brightly. Some showed fracture lines that suggested imminent hatching. In the center of the chamber, separated from the other clusters, stood a single massive structure that Sarah initially mistook for a natural rock formation. As she approached with her lights raised, she realized her mistake. It wasn't a rock formation at all. It was a dragon. A living, breathing dragon the size of a small spacecraft, lying in what appeared to be a deep hibernation. Her scales were the color of burnished copper, and they rose and fell with the slow, steady rhythm of breathing. Around her, arranged in careful, protective circles, were the largest and most recently laid eggs in the entire chamber. Sarah's hand shook as she raised her scanner, confirming what her eyes already told her. The massive creature was very much alive, her life signs strong and stable despite her apparent hibernation. According to the readings, she had been in this state for an extremely long time, possibly thousands of years. "Torres, Martinez," she called softly, afraid to speak too loudly in the presence of something so magnificent and potentially dangerous. "You need to see this." Her companions joined her at the base of the sleeping dragon, their faces visible through their helmet visors, wide with amazement and fear. "Is she?" Torres began. "Hibernating," Sarah confirmed. "Some kind of extended dormancy state. But look at these readings. Her brain activity suggests she's not unconscious. She's aware of her surroundings, just not actively responding to them." As if summoned by Sarah's words, the great dragon's eyes opened. They were the color of molten gold, ancient beyond measure, filled with intelligence that dwarfed anything Sarah had ever encountered. The dragon's gaze fixed on the three humans standing before her, and Sarah felt a presence touch her mind, gentle, curious, and unutterably vast. "You have found us at last," a voice whispered in Sarah's thoughts, warm and melodious despite its power. "We have been waiting so very long for someone to come who could truly see." Sarah's legs gave out, and she found herself sitting heavily on the chamber floor, her mind reeling from the contact with the ancient dragon's consciousness. The voice in her head was unlike anything she had ever experienced, not intrusive or overwhelming, but vast and patient, carrying the weight of millennia. Torres and Martinez had backed away, their hands instinctively moving to their sidearms. Though Sarah doubted any human weapon could harm a creature of such immense size and obvious power, the dragon, however, made no threatening moves. She simply watched them with those golden eyes, her massive head tilted slightly in what seemed like curiosity. "Do not fear," the voice continued, and Sarah realized the dragon was speaking to all three of them simultaneously. "I am Kyrethel, last mother of the Drakmori. I have waited in the deep places for one who could understand our need." "You're telepathic," Sarah managed to say aloud. finding her voice again. All Drakmori possessed the gift of mind speech, Kirithel confirmed. It was necessary for our survival, as it is now necessary for the survival of our children. The great dragon's gaze moved to the thousands of eggs arranged throughout the chamber. They have slept too long. Without the awakening song, they will remain trapped between life and death forever. Sarah forced herself to stand, her scientific training overriding her fear. This was the discovery of a lifetime, of 1,000 lifetimes. The Drakmori, thought extinct for millennia, had been here all along, waiting in hibernation deep beneath the surface of a world dismissed as barren by every other species in the galaxy. The other surveys, she said, understanding dawning. The Zephyrians, the Altarians, the Vorthans, they couldn't detect you. Their minds are closed to us, Kirithel explained. They see only what their instruments tell them to see. But humans, you are different. You have the gift of imagination, of seeing possibilities where others see only facts. This is why we waited. This is why I called to you across the void. You called to us? Taurus interjected, his voice tight with disbelief. How could you possibly have known we would come here? Kirithel's massive head turned toward him, and Sarah caught a glimpse of something that might have been amusement in those ancient eyes. Lieutenant Torres, is it not? Your species broadcasts its presence across the galaxy with every ship you launch, every communication you send, every dream of exploration you pursue. You are loud in the ways that matter to us. Martinez had been slowly moving around the chamber's perimeter, taking readings on the various egg clusters. Now he returned to the group, his face pale behind his visor. Doctor! Chen, he said urgently. Some of these eggs are starting to show stress patterns. Their metabolic rates are increasing, but in an irregular way. I think they're dying. Carothels! Mental voice suddenly carried a note of desperate urgency. Yes, the awakening song has been silent too long. Without it, the children begin to fade. I cannot sing it alone. My voice has grown weak with the long sleep. But perhaps with your help, we can give them the gift of life.
What do you need us to do?
Sarah asked without hesitation. Torres grabbed her arm. Sarah, we don't know what we're dealing with here. This could be dangerous. We should return to the ship, report our findings to Colonial Command, get a full xenobiology team down here. Sarah shook off his grip, her eyes never leaving the great dragon's face. And how long would that take? Months? Years? You heard what she said. These eggs are dying now. Your friend speaks wisely, Kirithel interjected gently. There is risk in what I ask. The awakening song requires a joining of minds, a sharing of life force. For humans, this is unknown territory. But it's possible, Sarah pressed. I believe so. Your minds are more flexible than those of the elder races, more creative. But I cannot guarantee your safety. Martinez looked up from his scanner, his expression grim. Dr. Chen, I'm reading multiple egg failures across the chamber. Whatever's happening, it's accelerating. Air. Sarah closed her eyes, weighing the decision. By every protocol of first contact, she should withdraw, report back, and wait for proper diplomatic channels to be established. But protocols had been written by species who thought in terms of centuries and millennia. Humans thought in terms of heartbeats and lifetimes. Sometimes that made them foolish. Sometimes it made them miraculous. Tell me what to do, she said aloud. Kirithel's great head lowered until it was level with Sarah's, those golden eyes filling her vision. Place your hands upon my brow. Open your mind to mine completely. Think of awakening, the first breath of a newborn. The moment consciousness stirs from sleep. The joy of discovering that you are alive and the world is vast and full of wonders. Sarah removed her gloves, her bare hands trembling as she reached toward the dragon's massive head. The scales were warm to the touch, smoother than she had expected, with a faint pattern that seemed to shift in the light. As her palms made contact, she felt a surge of connection unlike anything in her experience. Suddenly, she was no longer Sarah Chen, xenobiologist from Earth. She was part of something immeasurably greater, a consciousness that spanned millennia, that had seen the rise and fall of civilizations, that carried within it the genetic memory of an entire species. She felt Carathel's loneliness, the terrible burden of being the last of her kind, the mother of eggs that might never hatch without the proper awakening ritual. But she also felt hope. For the first time in thousands of years, Kirithel felt genuine hope. Now, the dragon's voice whispered in her mind, sing with me. The song that filled the chamber was beyond human comprehension. Not music as Sarah understood it, but something deeper. It was the rhythm of heartbeats, the whisper of breath in lungs, the electric pulse of neurons firing in a brain discovering consciousness. It was the voice of life itself, calling to life. Through her connection with Kirathel, Sarah felt the song reaching out to the thousands of eggs throughout the chamber. She felt their response, sluggish at first, then growing stronger as the ancient genetics within them recognized the signal they had been waiting for. One by one, the eggs began to pulse with brighter light, their shells developing the hairline cracks that would eventually become exit points for the creatures within. The song seemed to last forever and no time at all. When it finally faded, Sarah found herself gasping, her hands still pressed against Karathel's brow. Around them, the chamber had been transformed. Nearly every egg now glowed with vibrant life, their surfaces showing the telltale signs of imminent hatching. "It is done," Kirathel said, her mental voice heavy with exhaustion but bright with joy. "The children will live. You have given my species a future, Sarah Chen of Earth." Sarah stepped back, her legs unsteady. Torres and Martinez rushed to support her, their faces filled with concern and amazement. "Are you all right?" Torres demanded. "Your vital signs went completely erratic there for a moment." "I'm fine," Sarah managed, though she felt anything but fine. The connection with Kirathel had changed something fundamental in her mind, opened pathways of perception she hadn't known existed. She could still feel the dragon's presence at the edge of her consciousness, warm and protective. Martinez was studying his scanner with growing excitement. "Doctor? Chen, you need to see this. The egg vitality readings are off the charts. And, look, some of them are already starting to hatch." Indeed, several of the nearest eggs were developing larger cracks, and through the gaps, Sarah could see movement. As they watched, one egg split completely open, revealing a creature that was unmistakably a baby dragon. It was no larger than a house cat, its scales an iridescent silver that caught the light like polished metal. Tiny wings unfurled as it took its first breath, and then it opened its mouth and produced a sound that was part squeak, part roar, and entirely adorable. "My son," Kirathel said with overwhelming love, born at last into a world that will know dragons once more. The hatchling seemed to hear its mother's voice, though Sarah suspected the communication was telepathic rather than auditory. It turned toward the great dragon and began making its way across the chamber floor with unsteady but determined steps. More eggs were hatching now, revealing hatchlings in a variety of colors: silver, gold, deep blue, emerald green, and shades Sarah had no names for. Each one was unique, but all shared the same unmistakable characteristics: the elongated neck, the intelligent eyes, the graceful wings that would someday carry them through the skies of distant worlds. "This is incredible," Taurus breathed, lowering his weapon completely as he watched the baby dragons emerge from their eggs. "How many are there going to be?" "Several thousand if all goes well," Kirathel replied. "Enough to rebuild our species, though it will take many generations to restore what was lost." This had been approaching the Q chicken. Sarah noticed that some of the hatchlings were approaching the humans with apparent curiosity, showing no fear despite never having seen their species before. One particularly bold silver hatchling had made its way to Martinez and was attempting to climb his boot. "They're not afraid of us," she observed. "Why should they be?" Kirathel asked, with what Sarah was beginning to recognize as the dragon equivalent of gentle humor. "You are the ones who gave them life. To them, you are family." The implications of that statement hit Sarah like a physical blow. These creatures, potentially the most powerful species in the galaxy, would grow up thinking of humans as family. The political ramifications alone were staggering. But her contemplations were interrupted by a new voice. This one coming through her communication system rather than her mind. "Dr. Chen, this is Meridian. Please respond immediately. We're detecting multiple ships entering the system." "Large ships. They're not showing up on any of our databases." Sarah looked at Kirathel, seeing her own concern reflected in the dragon's golden eyes. "They have found us," Kirathel said grimly. "The Galactic Council's surveillance networks are more sophisticated than we hoped. News of your discovery has already reached them."
"Who?" Sarah asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew. "The Hegemony Fleet," Kirathel confirmed.
"Led by High Inquisitor Vextul of the Vorthan Empire. They are the ones charged with ensuring that the Drakmori remain extinct." Torres was already moving toward the chamber entrance. We need to get back to the ship immediately. If the Galactic Council is involved, this just became a diplomatic incident of the highest order. But Sarah remained where she was, watching as more and more baby dragons emerged from their shells, each one a miracle of life that had waited millennia to be born. Around her, the ancient chamber was filling with the sounds of new life squeaks and chirps and the rustle of tiny wings as hundreds of hatchlings took their first breaths. "They'll try to destroy them," she said quietly. "Won't they? The Council will claim they're too dangerous to be allowed to live." "Yes," Kirathel confirmed. "It is what they have always done, what they did to the rest of my kind." Sarah made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. Then we'll have to make sure they don't succeed. She activated her communication system, connecting directly to her ship. "Torres, Martinez, get back to Meridian immediately. Begin emergency broadcast protocols to Earth Colonial Command. Full data package on everything we've discovered here." "What about you?" Torres demanded. Sarah looked around the chamber, at the thousands of newly awakened eggs, at the magnificent dragon who had trusted humanity with her greatest treasure, at the baby dragons who were already beginning to explore their new world with fearless curiosity. "I'm staying," she said simply. "Someone needs to make sure they have a chance to grow up." The hegemony fleet materialized in orbit around Zirian Prime like a constellation of death. Sarah watched through her helmet's enhanced display as the massive vessels took up positions around the planet, their weapon arrays powering up with ominous precision. At their head was the flagship Dominion's Will, a behemoth of Vorthan design that bristled with enough firepower to crack a continent. "Chen," came the cold, mechanical voice of High Inquisitor Vex Thul through the communication system, "you will surrender yourself and any specimens you have discovered immediately. This system is now under Galactic Council Warrantine protocols." Sarah stood in the entrance to the Dragon Nursery, watching as thousands of newly hatched Drakmori took their first tentative steps into the world. Behind her, Kirithel's massive form radiated protective warmth, her golden eyes fixed on the ceiling as if she could see through kilometers of rock to the ships above. "Negative, High Inquisitor," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I am conducting legitimate scientific research under Colonial Survey Authority." "You have no jurisdiction here." A sound that might have been laughter came through the communication channel. "Dr. Chen, you are harboring the most dangerous species in galactic history. The Drakmori were exterminated for good reason. They are a threat to the stability of civilized space." "Tell him," Kirathel's voice whispered in Sarah's mind. "Tell him why his people really fear us." Sarah felt a surge of understanding flow through their mental connection. Images flashed through her consciousness, memories from Kirathel's ancient mind. She saw the Drakmori at the height of their civilization, not as the savage beasts of galactic propaganda, but as beings of incredible wisdom and compassion. They had been teachers, healers, guardians of knowledge. Their crime had not been violence or conquest. Their crime had been independence. "They weren't dangerous," Sarah said aloud, broadcasting on all frequencies so that every ship in the fleet could hear. "They were free. They couldn't be controlled, couldn't be conquered, couldn't be made to bow to the Galactic Council's authority. So you labeled them monsters and hunted them to extinction." Silence that followed her words stretched for several heartbeats. Then Vexthal's voice returned, colder than before. "You understand nothing, human. The Drakmori possessed powers beyond your comprehension. They could influence minds, command loyalty from lesser species, reshape entire worlds to their will. They were a threat to the natural order." "The natural order," Kirathel's mental voice carried bitter amusement, by which he means the order that places his species at the top of the hierarchy. More images flowed through their connection. Sarah saw the truth behind the Galactic Council's propaganda, a confederation of species so terrified of losing their grip on power that they had orchestrated genocide to maintain it. The Drakmori had been guilty of only one thing, showing other species that the Council's authority was not absolute. Around Sarah, the baby dragons continued their exploration of the chamber, seemingly oblivious to the danger above. Some had already begun to demonstrate remarkable abilities. One silver hatchling was levitating small stones with apparent ease, while an emerald-green youngster seemed to be communicating with the chamber's crystalline formations, causing them to pulse with sympathetic light. "Chen," came a new voice over the communication system. "Captain Rodriguez from the Meridian. Colonial Command has received our data package. They're dispatching the entire Third Fleet, but they won't arrive for at least 6 days. The hegemony forces are demanding you evacuate immediately or face the consequences. 6 days. Sarah looked around the chamber, calculating rapidly. Most of the eggs had hatched, but the newborns were still vulnerable, unable to survive outside the controlled environment of the underground sanctuary. In 6 days they might be strong enough to move, but not strong enough to defend themselves against a determined attack. "Captain," she replied, "transmit a message to High Inquisitor Vexful. Tell him I request a formal parley under Galactic Council protocols. As a representative of a sovereign species, I have the right to negotiate." "You cannot trust them," Kirithel warned. "They will agree to parley only to get close enough to strike." "I know," Sarah said quietly. "But we need time. Time for the hatchlings to grow stronger, time for help to arrive, time to think of a solution." She opened a direct channel to the hegemony flagship. "High Inquisitor, I invoke Article 47 of the Galactic Accord. I request formal parley to discuss the status of this world and its inhabitants." Another long pause. Then, "You have 1 hour to present yourself aboard the Dominion's will. Come alone and unarmed. Any deviation from these terms will result in immediate orbital bombardment." Sarah began stripping off her environmental suit, preparing for what might be her final mission. Around her, Baby Dragon sensed the change in her emotional state and began gathering at her feet, looking up at her with eyes that already showed remarkable intelligence. "You cannot go to them," Kirithel said urgently. "They will kill you the moment you board their ship." "Maybe," Sarah agreed. "But maybe not. Humans have a reputation in the galaxy for being unpredictable. They might be curious enough to hear what I have to say." "General." She knelt among the hatchlings, running her hands gently over their warm scales. Each touch sent a small jolt of mental connection, and she realized that her experience with Carathel had opened her mind to all the Drakmori, young and old alike. She could feel their emotions, their thoughts, their incredible potential. "Listen to me, little ones," she said softly, knowing they could understand her through the mental link. "I have to go away for a while. Stay with your mother. Grow strong. Learn everything she teaches you. And remember that not all the galaxy sees you as monsters. Some of us see you for what you truly are, miracles." "Sarah," Kirithel's voice was filled with ancient sadness, "you have given us the greatest gift imaginable. Whatever happens now, the Drakmori will remember Sarah Chen of Earth for all the generations to come." The shuttle ride to the hegemony flagship gave Sarah time to review everything she had learned about Vorthan psychology and council politics. The Vorthans were a proud species convinced of their own superiority, but they were also deeply practical. They wouldn't risk a war with humanity over a single world unless they perceived the threat as existential. The Dominion's will was a monument to Vorthan engineering and ego. Its corridors were lined with displays celebrating their conquests and contributions to galactic civilization. Sarah was escorted by a full squad of armored warriors to a vast chamber that seemed designed to intimidate anyone who entered it. High Inquisitor Vexthul was exactly what Sarah had expected. Tall, austere, with the characteristic chitinous features of his species, and eyes like chips of black ice. He stood behind a podium that elevated him well above Sarah's eye level, a calculated display of dominance. "Dr. Chen," he began without preamble, "you have discovered creatures that represent an existential threat to galactic stability. They cannot be allowed to survive." "Based on what evidence?" Sarah challenged. "Everything I've observed suggests they're peaceful, intelligent, and pose no threat to anyone." "You have observed infants," Vexthul replied dismissively. "Adult Drakmori can influence the minds of entire populations, reshape matter at the molecular level, and command forces that lesser species cannot comprehend. They are gods pretending to be animals, and gods have no place in civilized space." Sarah felt a flash of insight. "You're afraid of them." The High Inquisitor's posture stiffened. "The Vorthan Empire fears nothing. Not the Vorthans. The Council. You're afraid that if the Drakmori return, other species will realize they don't need the Council's protection. They don't need your laws, your regulations, your carefully maintained balance of power. The Drakmori represent freedom, and that terrifies you. The Drakmori represent chaos," Vexthul countered. "Their very existence undermines the stability we have worked millennia to achieve." "Stability built on fear and oppression," Sarah shot back. "Stability maintained by genocide when necessary. Tell me, High Inquisitor, how many other species have you quietly eliminated because they didn't fit your vision of galactic order?" The silence that followed confirmed her suspicions. The Council hadn't just destroyed the Drachmori, they had systematically eliminated any species that showed signs of becoming too independent, too powerful, too free. You offer no alternative. Vexthal said finally. The creatures must be destroyed. This is not negotiable. I offer partnership, Sarah replied. The dragons need time to grow, to learn, to develop their abilities responsibly. Humanity is willing to serve as their guardians to ensure they integrate peacefully into galactic society.
Humans are barely capable of managing their own affairs, the High Inquisitor sneered.
You would entrust them with gods? Sarah smiled, and there was something in that smile that made even the ancient Vorthan pause. High Inquisitor, let me tell you something about humans. We have a long history of taking in strays, of protecting the vulnerable, of standing up to bullies no matter how big they are. You see the dragons as threats to be eliminated. We see them as children to be protected, and we will protect them. Against the entire Galactic Council, if necessary. Vexthal studied her for a long moment, and Sarah could see him calculating probabilities, weighing options.
Humans were new to the galactic stage, but they had already earned a reputation for stubborn determination and tactical brilliance.
A war with humanity would be costly, and there was no guarantee of victory.
You would risk your entire species for creatures you've known for less than a day?
Sarah thought of the baby dragons exploring their ancient nursery, of Carathel's patient wisdom, of the incredible potential she had felt flowing through their mental connection. High Inquisitor, she said quietly, there are things worth fighting for and things worth dying for. Some things are even worth living for. The dragons represent hope. Hope for a galaxy where power doesn't come from fear, where intelligence is valued over conformity, where freedom isn't seen as a threat to be eliminated. Yes, I would risk everything for that. Before Vexthal could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. A communications officer rushed into the chamber, his chitinous features flushed with excitement. High Inquisitor, the officer reported. We're detecting massive energy signatures from the planet's surface. The readings are unlike anything in our databases. Through the chamber's viewing ports, Sarah could see lights beginning to appear in the atmosphere of Zerion Prime, not the harsh glare of weapons fire, but a soft golden radiance that seemed to pulse with life itself. Sarah, Chirathel's voice whispered in her mind across the vast distance. The children are singing their first song. They are calling to their cousins among the stars. As Sarah watched in amazement, the lights in the planet's atmosphere began to spread. Reaching out into space itself, she realized what was happening. The newly awakened dragon hatchlings were broadcasting their existence to any Drachmori who might still survive in hidden refuges throughout the galaxy. And they were getting answers. New contacts began appearing on the Hegemony Fleet's sensors ships, unlike anything in the galactic databases. Organic constructs that seemed to be part living creature, part spacecraft. They emerged from hyperspace in groups, their designs graceful and alien, converging on Zerion Prime from across the galaxy. Impossible, Vexthal breathed. Our intelligence indicated complete extinction. There should be none left. We are survivors, came a new voice in Sarah's mind, ancient and powerful beyond measure. We have waited in the dark places, in the forgotten corners of space, for the call we thought would never come. The children of Chirathl sing with voices of hope. The time of hiding is ended. More ships appeared, then more. Within minutes, the Hegemony Fleet found itself outnumbered 10-1 by vessels that radiated power like small suns. The Drachmori had not been extinct after all. They had simply been waiting. High Inquisitor, Sarah said quietly. I believe your negotiating position just changed significantly. Vexthal's black eyes fixed on her, with something that might have been respect. You knew. Somehow, you knew they would come. I hoped, Sarah corrected. Hope is what humans do best. The massive U-screen in the chamber flickered to life, showing the image of a Drachmori unlike any Sarah had yet seen. This one was clearly ancient, its scales a deep purple that seemed to hold depths of starlight, its eyes like galaxies in miniature. I am Zephyros, the dragon said, its mental voice carrying the authority of eons, elder of the hidden sanctuaries, speaker for the dispersed. We have come to reclaim our children and to judge those who would harm them. Sarah felt Vexthal's fear through the ship's vibrations, saw it in the way his armored escorts shifted nervously. The Hegemony Fleet might be powerful, but they were facing beings who had survived the Council's genocide, and learned to hide among the stars for millennia. These were not the peaceful dragons of the nursery chamber. These were warriors who had nothing left to lose. But we are not without mercy, Zephyros continued, and Sarah realized the dragon was speaking to her as much as to the Vorthan commander. The human Sarah Chen has proven that not all species share the Council's fear of freedom. For her sake, and for the sake of the children she helped save, we offer terms. The terms, as it turned out, were simple and non-negotiable. The hegemony fleet would withdraw immediately and report to the Galactic Council that Zerion Prime was under the protection of both the Drakmori Collective and the Human Colonial Authority. Any future attempts at interference would be met with the full force of dragons who had spent millennia preparing for exactly such a confrontation. 3 hours later, Sarah stood once again in the nursery chamber, surrounded by baby dragons who had grown noticeably in just the short time she had been gone. The chamber itself had changed too. The arrival of the elder Drakmori had awakened ancient systems throughout the complex, and now the walls glowed with soft light that seemed to nourish the young dragons. "You have exceeded even my greatest hopes," Carathel said, her mental voice warm with gratitude. "Not only have you given my children life, you have given them a future free from fear." "What happens now?" Sarah asked, watching as several of the hatchlings demonstrated increasingly sophisticated abilities under the patient guidance of newly arrived adult dragons. "Now we rebuild," came the voice of Elder Zephyros, who had taken up residence in a massive chamber adjacent to the nursery. "We reclaim our place in the galaxy, but carefully, wisely. We have learned much from our time in hiding about the value of patience and the danger of unchecked power." Sarah nodded, understanding. The dragons would return to the galaxy, but they would do so as partners rather than rulers, teachers rather than conquerors, and humanity, by virtue of one xenobiologist's compassion and courage, had earned a place at their side. "There is more," Carathel added, and Sarah detected a note of something like mischief in the dragon's mental voice. "The awakening song you helped me sing has had unexpected effects. The bond between human and Drakmori consciousness appears to be permanent. You are the first of your species to be truly joined with ours." Sarah felt a stirring in her mind, a sense of vast possibilities opening before her. Through her connection with the dragons, she could perceive dimensions of reality she had never imagined, could feel the pulse of life throughout the galaxy in ways that transcended physical sensation.
"What does that mean?" she asked.
"It means," said a familiar voice, as Torres and Martinez entered the chamber, followed by several other humans from the Colonial Survey team, "that you're not the only one." Sarah stared at her colleagues, seeing the same subtle changes in their eyes that she felt in herself. During the crisis, other survey team members had formed bonds with the newly hatched dragons, creating connections that would reshape both species' understanding of consciousness and community. "The joining is spreading," Carathel observed with satisfaction. "Soon, there will be humans who can speak with dragons and dragons who understand human hearts. This is how we will build the future, not through conquest or dominion, but through understanding and shared purpose." 6 months later, Dr. Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed research station orbiting Zerion Prime. Below them, the planet had been transformed into a thriving center of interspecies cooperation. Dragon youngsters soared through the skies alongside human atmospheric craft, while on the surface, joint teams of researchers from dozens of species worked together to unlock the secrets of Drakmori technology and human ingenuity. The Galactic Council had officially recognized the Zerion Accords, establishing the world as an independent sanctuary under joint human-dragon protection. It was the first time in galactic history that the Council had been forced to acknowledge the sovereignty of a world they didn't control, and the ripple effects were being felt across civilized space. Other species were beginning to ask questions about the Council's authority, about the real history of supposedly extinct civilizations, about the possibility of alternatives to the carefully controlled status quo that had dominated galactic politics for millennia. "Quite a view," observed Captain Rodriguez, joining Sarah at the observation window. "Hard to believe it all started with a routine survey mission?" Sarah smiled, feeling the warm presence of dozens of dragon minds at the edge of her consciousness, along with the growing network of bonded humans who now served as bridges between the species. "Not routine," she corrected gently. "Hope. It all started with hope." Above them, a formation of young dragons performed aerial maneuvers that painted trails of light across Zerion Prime's sky, their joyous songs audible even through the station's hull. They were free, they were alive, and they were ready to help shape a galaxy where freedom and wisdom mattered more than fear and control. The Age of Dragons had begun again, and this time, they would not face extinction alone.